Welcome back after those panel sessions. I know there were lots of points of interest in this one and from talking with Matt, who has been roving around. So I hope there's been a spark of something new, a consolidation of something that makes you feel like you're on the right path, or a new relationship that you've formed in listening or in sitting with a group of different people that might help support you in terms of the change you're trying to create. I'd now like to introduce Matt Anderson, who's going to run a session for us to really talk about how we might make the most of some of those network opportunities. Matt is the principal of Anderson Strategy. He's a strategy designer with global group Business Models Inc. and the co-founder of Social Capital, a venture working with hundreds of senior executives and leaders from business, government, technology, health and civil society to turn social needs into new innovation and venture opportunities at scale, which is really carrying on from what we heard Susie talk about this morning. Matt's been a social entrepreneur for over 20 years, including founding a number of impact organisations, working as an organisational development and innovation coach, and being the catalyst for many cross-sector collaborative projects. He has experience in grassroots and national and international capacity, so a whole range of leadership levels, and is really looking at how we transform cities through collaboration. And so I would ask you to join me in welcoming Matt to take us through this last session before lunch.
Kristen, and thanks everyone. It's great to be here today. I've got the great honour of being the session before lunch, so none of you will be thinking of food or drink or breaks or anything like that. But really one of the things I just want to talk about is that social capital as a movement has a passion and ambition and a belief that Adelaide actually can become a global centre of excellence, one of the world's true social capital cities for networks, for government, public, private, and all the other spaces in between, actually responding to the great social and environmental and economic challenges of our time. That's our belief, that's our passion, that's our goal, and we've now got almost 1,000 other companies and leaders from around this state and beyond who are participating with us and joining with us in that vision. Just want to read to you a statement right now. It's a quote from Stanford University's Social Innovation Review. Innovation blossoms where the sectors converge, where the exchange of ideas and values, the shifts in roles and relationships, and the integration of private capital with public and philanthropic support generate new and better approaches to creating new value. Innovation blossoms where the sectors converge. And I'm sharing today really as someone who partners with and connects with and learns from people within government, but not as someone who myself works within government. And just something that I want to share with you. We've heard a bit before from Susie Souza, our speaker, about the global trend. The reality is the world's changing. There's stuff going on around the world that's really impacting us and this conversation today. Some of those trends include the mega trends of globalisation, of technology, the rise of the Asian region, which we know about, ageing populations, and what that is meaning and what that's doing, both as challenges around the world, but framed in a different way also as new opportunities. Within those mega trends, social innovation, purpose-driven enterprise, and where the private, public and research sectors come together is emerging as a key theme. Some of those themes are urbanisation, smart being the new green, the future of energy, the future of mobility and transportation, and health, wellness and well-being being a global need and a global trend. These are global challenges that are happening all over the place. And again, framed with a different point of view, are opportunities for those who want to dial into it. The reality is that traditional walls, the walls between sectors, the walls between industries and people are actually disappearing. We used to talk a lot about the distinct sector and the distinct industry. And around the world, these megatrends are actually meaning that those walls and boundaries and barriers are becoming a whole lot more porous. They're disappearing. There are regions around the world who are actually capitalising on these new trends, and there's some great things happening. We actually believe that South Australia could become one of the world's leading ones. You've heard a bit about Austin today from Susie. There's some great things going on in Singapore where there are whole regions and areas and districts looking at biotech and energy. In Springfield in Queensland, they're actually looking at a health city just outside of Brisbane where they're actually again wanting to integrate and combine all of this in new ways out in the real world, out in society. The Ontario region of Canada is a really interesting one. They're actually integrating this whole approach between a city and the regions, the towns, and that whole Ontario region. In that space, what's happened there is the economy over about 20 years ago became really depressed because old industries started to leave in manufacturing and in automobile transportation and making of cars. Sound familiar? And in Ontario, they're actually looking across this whole integrated approach of how they can join up between the sectors, how they can actually blend and emerge what's happening between those sectors and those spaces. And so as we zoom into the local picture, I'd love to share with you for the next 10 minutes or so what's actually happening here in South Australia. The sessions that I was just visiting before were really interesting. There was all kinds of things going on. The conversation around new joined-up government and how new forms of governance can actually bring value in the public sector. This whole conversation around putting the citizens at the centre of placemaking and designing and working with, not just for, in local areas. Some of the local government initiatives in health and education and some of those systems there. And then hearing some people's entrepreneurial response to some of the challenges of the state around homelessness or around employment, around what happens to veterans when they come back. And it was just really interesting to hear these things. And this thread that kept on emerging, and we've been hearing it all day, is the thread of networking. How do you actually bring and bind and join together these things that sometimes fit well and naturally and easily, and sometimes don't? And the art is in actually the doing, not just the thinking, not just the conversations and the talking. The art is actually moving from that into the doing. There's some stuff going on in South Australia, and I want to just share with you what's happening in the social economy here locally. And you heard Susie talk about that a little bit from a broad term as a concept. But here in South Australia, there are some really interesting things going on. There's some things that are actually kind of drawing the eyes of the world to us right now, which you may or may not be aware of. But right now, the fastest part that's growing in the South Australian economy is this whole social economy. Over the last few years, the ABS tells us that it's been 13% increase in employment and jobs growth, far outstripping any other area. Happening in South Australia, there's over 100 cooperatives in South Australia. So these kind of old forms of blended public value in kind of commercial engagement in the world. But these over 100 co-ops, the top 10 of them have a combined turnover of $1.5 billion. This is actually a large industry, and this is where public and private value are coming together in some new ways. There's the rise in public investment and private investment. So the stuff that government budgets used to always fund. Traditionally, it was actually the philanthropic sector. It was people giving donations out of the kindness of their heart, and it was the public budget. It was government spending on all kinds of areas that were addressing education and healthcare and mobility and disability and all kinds of things that were happening. What's happening right now in South Australia is there's this rise in private investment. We've heard about the Aspire program. It was a social impact bond. It was oversubscribed in a short amount of time. Over $9 million was raised, and it's one of the first of its kind in the world, addressing homelessness from the response of blended private, social organisations, community organisations, and private capital investors, the new angel investors who are actually putting their own equity into solving and responding to social challenges. That's going on here in South Australia. One of the things you may not be aware of is there's over 185 businesses in South Australia that self-identify either as social enterprises or as benefit corporations, B Corps. So these are companies that exist to actually bring income and impact together. Their sole purpose is to use the force of business and the mechanism of actually creating value for customers and society to respond to these social, economic, and environmental challenges. And it's amazing what's going on in South Australia. So this whole area of purpose-driven enterprise is on the rise. The NAB Bank, National Australia Bank, just commissioned a report, and they decided that within 3 years' time, this whole kind of social economy, this area of the market in Australia, is going to be worth over $35 billion annually. So this is the stuff where government spend and budgets used to almost totally be the things that were relied on and lent on to solve. And what we're seeing around the world and in South Australia is that game is changing, dramatically changing in a radical way. I want to now just bring this home and talk to you about someone in South Australia who's bringing this to life. And I want to talk about Amy and her venture Harvest Fair. It's a really interesting blend, I think, of the people that are in this room right now, because she works for a social impact organisation. She saw the limitations that actually brought for her in responding to her social challenge, and she's really passionate about the empowering women and I suppose the challenges that women, in particular young women, face in the workforce. So she enrolled in a program called the Social Ventures Incubator Program. And that was auspiced and supported by local government. It was the Adelaide City Council. And that was really interesting because that was funded by the local government and supported by them, not just in money, but in kind and resource and by talent. But it was delivered by a private company that actually delivered and designed the framework of this new incubator. And then it was people that actually were integrated or sent from whatever part of society, quite a few of them from the old traditional charity space. And so this really interesting blend came about and happened in South Australia recently. So she talks about Harvest Fair as a social enterprise which uses the power of good food to advance gender equity in Australia. So they employ women who cook and who create amazing food, nutritious food. They then deploy that and send that to offices around cities. And so office workers actually have a new way to get their quick lunch, but it's nutritious and it's fresh. And often she's employing and working with people from different migrant groups who would struggle to get into the economy and get into normal work. And it's quite an amazing model. Last year she won the Pitch for Good event and now is crowdfunding her venture herself, and it's quite an amazing story. And so for me, I think really landing this today is how do we join the two things together? How do we join what's going on globally, this new global megatrend and this rise of kind of this blended social entrepreneurship? And how do we connect that with the story and the things that are emerging in South Australia, both within the public sector, in the private space, and the social impact space? How do we bring those two things together? And I want to put to you one way this could happen as something that's really powerfully inspired me and informed the way I work and really, I suppose, opened my eyes. It's this phrase, network entrepreneurship. And I know it's, you talk about it perhaps as network intrapreneurship, but the Stanford Social Innovation Review, probably about 18 months ago, authored this amazing series, and they talked about network entrepreneurs as these new individuals. They weren't talking about a new program, because programs, as we know, can be hard sometimes to set up. They weren't talking about a new framework or a new policy or a new system or a new structure. They actually started to interview human beings, the individuals, and what they were doing and how they were behaving, how they were thinking about stuff, and what that then led them to do. And so they put out this whole report on network entrepreneurship. The authors of that report were some guys from the US, and I'm going to circle back to them because they've become very interested in the South Australian story and what's going on right now. And so for the next few moments, I want to talk about the behaviours of network entrepreneurs, the kind of things that we as people can do, the kind of ways that the Stanford Social Innovation Review talked about this, and maybe some of the things that you can apply and I can apply in my everyday. So there are 5 behaviours or 5 ways that network entrepreneurs act. And I'd love to share them with you right now. The first thing they do is they clarify purpose. So network entrepreneurs are people that are really dialed in and very focused on the why, the reason. What is the purpose behind what they do? What's the challenge they're responding to? What's the problem they're trying to solve? They're laser focused on this. And they're laser focused then on what do they believe? What's the aspiration? What could the world look like if they were able to overcome this challenge or respond to this problem? And network entrepreneurs are people that clarify purpose. They continue to refine and refine and refine. We all know, guys, that the world's changing so fast, that our lives are changing so fast, the needs of citizens are changing so fast, that just having one static view or one static purpose can often be very, very difficult. But something that can be agile and grow and evolve and adapt is a really powerful thing. Network entrepreneurs, the guys from Stanford said, is actually understand that the agreement has got to be on the vision, on the dream. The agreement can't always be on the process. The agreement can't always be on the method because there are so many ways that we can go about responding to these things. But they're clear and they continue to refine and clarify the reason, the purpose behind what they do. The second thing that network entrepreneurs do and the way they behave and what they're focused on is in convening people. Network entrepreneurs are connectors, and they convene people, and they convene certain types of people. Now, when Stanford wrote about convening the right people, they weren't talking about being exclusive and actually having some kind of like justice issue and only including certain people. They weren't talking about normal hierarchies and only those that were powerful and influential can come in and the rest can stay out. They weren't talking about that at all. They were really flipping that on its head. What they were talking about is that the people that they convene are people that represent all parts of society. They represent all parts of the system, and this is really, really important, right? Because even those of us who have the kind of, I suppose, influence that we've been given, the kind of responsibilities that we're entrusted with that we don't take for granted, the reality is our view gets skewed by that over time. Our view gets skewed by the offices that we're in and by the conversations that we have. And so network entrepreneurs make sure they convene people who actually have really different points of view. They convene people that are willing to cross boundaries. They convene people that think and act very, very differently. They're divergent thinkers. They're divergent actors. And they convene people who can handle creative tension. So the reality is when you start to convene people around these big dreams, these big ideas, and how do you actually bring it to life? How do you actually resolve and respond to these social and environmental and economic challenges? How do we see the private, the public sector and all parts of society come together? You have to live with creative tension, with disagreement, with different points of view. And so they have this sense of being able to live with that. The third behaviour that network entrepreneurs exhibit and show is that they cultivate trust. So they're clarifying, they're convening, and they're cultivating. Stanford talked about these people as people who develop not just ROI, return on investment, but they develop ROR, return on relationship. They spoke really highly on the power of ROR. The power of actually the relationships that we've formed year after year after year, the way that we've shown up, and that being a really powerful tool, and that actually being a great asset that we need to understand better and use better and have it better inform the choices that we make. In cultivating trust, network entrepreneurs understand that agreement on the process isn't necessary, like I said. They also understand that always liking each other isn't necessary. We're going to have disagreements. We're going to have different points of views, and sometimes that's going to challenge us, that's going to push our buttons. And often when we try and have these kind of collaborative conversations, we talk about networks, we get really, really stuck on kind of like the external things and the superficial things. And the reality is we're going to have to handle a little bit of disagreement, and sometimes not always liking everybody in the room, not always having everybody in the room agree or like us. That's a challenge. The fourth behaviour that network entrepreneurs show is that they coordinate actions. One thing's really, really important. They talk about not ever replicating actions. So they never try and recreate the wheel. They never try and keep on doing what others are doing or recreate what someone else is doing. So it's not about new activities. It's about discovering what is the activities already going on and coordinating them better, actually finding them better and connecting them more. They're flexible, they leverage the resources of the team and of the group and of the community, and they work really, really hard to map the system and kind of see what different parts of society bring and see where those complementary strengths might sit and where my weaknesses might meet your strengths and how we might be able to share that together. And the fifth behaviour, the final thing, is that they collaborate. They stop, collaborate, and listen. That's just from my era for anyone who needs that one. They collaborate. They're really generous in the way they collaborate. And Stanford kind of talked about this, and I'm going to bring it to life in a little bit with one of the examples that they use. But they're really generous with their time. They're really generous with their expertise. They're generous with their resources. They communicate generously. They're always talking with each other. They're sharing. They're learning. They're listening. And they keep on focusing on that sense of being... I suppose investing, putting real skin in the game. And so some of the things that I suppose there's an example of this, of collaborating generously and putting the skin in the game, perhaps even from a kind of a government and society point of view, is something really interesting going on in New Zealand right now. So in New Zealand, they've actually started this new thinking around a different kind of immigration policy. And what they've done is they've recognised that, like Australia, there's all kinds of social challenges, there's environmental challenges, there's the challenges of market forces and what might happen in a depressed economy, and how do we keep on, I suppose, kick-starting and stimulating economic development. How do we actually drill that down to economic empowerment of citizens and of families and of people? And so what they're doing in New Zealand is they've seen this global megatrend of social innovation and social entrepreneurship and purpose-driven enterprise. And they've realised that they've also got some challenges around their own workforce and the talent and what they actually need for their own productivity as citizens. And so they've started a new immigration policy that they actually allow, if you're a social entrepreneur, they've got a different kind of way, a different form of immigration process. They've cleared all the red tape. And they've allowed people with a demonstrated history at actually starting up ventures and enterprises that work with private and public sector, that actually unlock both private and public capital as well. And they've allowed these people to come in a new kind of visa system. They've also then put skin in the game by investing and putting out some seed funding behind their activities in New Zealand. And so the kind of ventures they can create, the kind of stimulus to the economy, but also the kind of hand and support to the social challenges going on there are very, very different. And so this is being talked of all over the world, and there's been articles written all over the world about what New Zealand is attempting and trying to do as they collaborate generously, as they put skin in the game and actually move from talk and thought to activity. I want to tell you the InterEyes story. InterEyes was one of the groups that actually are talking with us right now. They're very interested in what's happening in Adelaide and South Australia. The other authors were a group called Converge, and both of those two that the Stanford Social Innovation Review featured in this whole article are talking with us and in constant dialogue with us. They're really, really interested in what's happening in Adelaide, but their story is really interesting. So rather than try and build one brand or one venture, they went out and they started connecting with people in government, people in business, and people in the community. They had a whole heap of partners that were government departments, traditional NGOs, and sort of business chambers, the American Chamber of Commerce, and some of those kind of areas. And they started a program called the Streetwise MBA. If you ever get a chance to look this up, it's fascinating. Streetwise MBA, InterEyes. And so what's happened is they were able to actually help people who were underrepresented and found it very difficult to enter into the workforce, or kind of struggled with traditional areas of exclusion and marginalisation and poverty. They actually help these people through training with the kind of like social institution, civil society space, with new policy and some seed startup funding from government and by the public sector, and by the private sector of business actually starting to create new small businesses. What they've found is they had amazing success, and they had migrants, they had people who were non-English speaking, they had women who were struggling to get into the workforce, they had other parts of inner city society, this is in Boston in the US, and they saw great success. What's happened now, 10 years later, is that all the businesses that were created, they had this blended social and economic kind of imperatives together, that these businesses have grown and continue to grow at 5 times faster than the rest of the private sector. It's really amazing, and they were able to unlock through their program, through this Streetwise MBA program. They actually say one of the great keys to what they do and the great success of the last decade has been this. They call it the Harry Truman rule of purpose-driven innovation. It simply says it's amazing what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit. And that's the thing that founds them, and that's the thing that grounds them. Network entrepreneurs are those people who join the dots. They're people who weave new connections, they find unlikely sources, they break traditional boundaries and traditional sectors, they create new connective tissue between all the things that exist in themselves. They actually do that really powerfully. They're consistent, they're innovators, they look for scalable business models outside of the norms, They're curators and enablers of others, and they're very, very big picture in their view. The other thing about network entrepreneurs is they don't network just for themselves. They connect others with others in a really powerful way. So there's an opportunity for South Australia. There's some amazing places around the world doing some incredible things, but the eyes of the world are looking at us. The guys from Converge, InterEyes, Austin, Springfield, they're actually looking at something. There's something going on. There's something in the water of South Australia right now. We actually believe that South Australia can become a global social capital and that network entrepreneurship is an important key. And the people like you guys in the room are just really, really important facilitators of that. There's about 830 similar-sized cities around the world to Adelaide. They've all got the same challenges, they've all got the same needs, and if we could start to crack something in a new way, as a city that could be one of the most joined-up cities in the world, a new global hotspot for this kind of thing. A new global hotspot for combined social, economic, environmental benefit. A new global hotspot of joining up the dots and connecting with network entrepreneurs. A new global hotspot of actually doing this through us, through people. And those cities are looking at us right now. Innovation blossoms where the sectors converge, where the exchange of ideas and values, where the shifts in roles and relationships, and the integration of private capital with public and philanthropic support generate new and better approaches to creating value. And so in the last minute or two, I just want to ask you just to, on your own, take out your pen. I think you've all got notebooks and you've got some areas where you can write notes. And I want you just to think for a moment. I'm going to pose 2 questions. I'm just going to get you to think for 1 minute on each question and just write down one word, one phrase, one sentence that comes to mind in this. And the first question is this. If South Australia became a global hotspot for network entrepreneurship, if South Australia became a global centre for this stuff where blended environmental, social and commercial benefit live together, what would the implications be for your department? So if that happened, if that's what Adelaide became tomorrow, what would the implications be? Just have a think and just write something down. And finally, I want to end with this. Just want to ask you to think about and just write what comes to mind. What's one thing that you can do? You as an individual. Forget systems and structures and programs and policies just for the moment. What's something that you can do, one thing, to better join up with others outside your sphere? What's one thing you can do, even in 2017, to more intentionally become a network entrepreneur? Just have a think. Just write something down. I want to thank you for your time. It's great to be here, and I'm going to hand over, and I think we're going to lunch. Is that right? I'll hand over to Kristen.
The 2 things that I have in my mind after listening to the session that I was in and listening to Matt is that we need to be able to be brave, mostly to follow the rabbit holes where things fall through the gaps between what we currently do. And I must have heard there's something in the water in Adelaide 3 times this morning, so we've just got to be brave enough to drink it. I think if I remember anything from Alison Hewitt's social capital thinker residency a few weeks ago, what she said is that we've got lots of ideas and we've got lots of different approaches, but we just seem to hesitate. So it's actually the doing, the finishing, the empowering people, getting people together to actually do what we can imagine. And I think that's what's so exciting about this forum, because we're not having that conversation about only ideas, and we're starting to see the outcomes of that bravery. There is no bravery required for lunch, I can guarantee that. So we're out here for lunch. The next sessions will start at 1:15, and again we're in our 3 rooms. So here you'll have Dan Butler looking at the entrepreneur as an innovation catalyst. In the Premier Suite you'll have Alex Taylor looking at how to get your message across. That's the Pitch Ninja presentation session. And I'll be next door with the Adelaide Botanic High looking at creating an open school. And those sessions start at 1:15. Enjoy lunch, enjoy your conversations, and thank you very much.